Hello, and welcome to episode 14 of the Mindful Wealth podcast. We have with us today Arno Ilgner, who is the writer of The Rock Warrior's Way. Arno, in his book, refines a methodology that can help people train awareness and attention, get rid of power sinks, and tune into reality. He sits right on the lines between internal and external motivations. He's now writing a more general book called The Warrior's Way, and we're excited to talk to Arno today a little bit about what we as individuals can do and how we manage our mindset and how that kind of feeds into our concepts of true wealth. So, Arno, do you want to tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, I live in the U.S. in Tennessee, southeastern part, and I've been here most of my life, except for, some maybe a decade out west, seeking my fortune. But right now, for the last 25 years or so, I've been teaching this mental training method that I developed for rock climbers called the Warrior's Way. And so it's been kind of a long journey, to develop the material, and we have a network of trainers right now. And from the very beginning, Terry and Jonathan, it's like I knew that this material was valuable and helpful for people. And so even though I started in the climbing direction, at some point in the future, I knew that I wanted to bridge it to the non-climbing arena and write a book to help people in the general population. And that's where I am right now.
You write about the methodology, but what does warrior training look like? What is the process?
Yeah, it's a really important question because I think there's something very specific around what it means to be a warrior to really understand what that training will be. So our traditional warriors are protectors of our society. So right now it's our soldiers, even our first responders. And they are trained in a certain way to do their job, to be able to fulfill their responsibility, which is different than the way the rest of us are trained. So in other words, warriors are trained to move toward the threat, to engage it and do their best to neutralize it, to protect the rest of society. So that's a very specific way of dealing with a threat or a stressor. And so the Warrior's Way, for a training method, for what we can learn from these traditional warriors, is we can find a way to do that same thing in our lives. Like, we have stressors in our lives also, and we can move toward those instead of shying away from it, which can be our tendency.
Just as context, because I think if folks have tuned in and listened to the last couple episodes, they know that we sometimes take a very big global macro view. And I like the fact that we're talking to you for a couple of reasons. One, Terry and I both read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which I think much of your work comes out of. And I read it, I must have been 19 when I read it. So this is a long time ago. But I loved it. It was meaningful to me. And it's a book I still have on my shelf. But the idea of going deep on what an individual can do, and I think you just summed it up, go towards the threat, go towards the difficulty, go towards the challenge instead of running away from it. So why is training awareness and attention so important? Why is that a first key?
Awareness is the foundation for the training method, that we do. And I think it needs to be the foundation for any kind of mental training method, and even for how we live our lives. Like, we need to be able to be more and more aware of our situation, what's going on inside of ourselves, and also what's going on around us, like in the relationships. So by having a methodology that helps us become ever more aware as we do our training, I think that's really important. Now, attention is, you might say, the intentional directing of awareness. So as we become more aware, we can have certain tasks that we need to do during the day, and we can intentionally focus on this task or that task. And by doing that, we're going to be more effective in the actions that that task requires, right? So if we can improve our ability to become aware and then improve our ability to keep our attention focused on whatever the task is that we've chosen to do, then we're going to be more effective.
I think it's so interesting because we just actually recorded an episode with somebody who looks at how the culture of Wall Street impacts the pressure to financialize things. And I think what's so interesting is that she really concluded the interview by talking about how important awareness is of the implications of what our little actions, how they sort of radiate out from what we do. And so I think it's, anyways, I just wanted to kind of riff off that and say that, I think it's a good point that awareness really is at the heart of things. But I wonder if we could just kind of ask, we had an off-camera chat just previous to, the interview we had scheduled earlier, which was about the two kinds of motivations that human beings have. And I really liked the point that you said, humans on the one hand seek comfort, but at the same time, if we are to surpass our current limitations, we have to have a mechanism for getting out of our comfort zone. And I wonder if you could maybe say a few words about that.
There are two basic motivations. One's more extrinsic, where we're motivated, toward achieving something external to ourselves. Like in climbing, it would be climbing a certain mountain. In life, it might be, to have a certain amount of wealth, or, a certain amount of money, or to land a certain job. So that's an extrinsic way of being motivated, towards something outside of us. Intrinsic motivation comes from inside of us, like something that moves us through stressors that we actually want to be in. Like we're motivated to do that activity for its own sake, not for the goal. When we look at these two motivations, in the past, we can have a tendency to think we have to choose between them. Like, well, which one is more important, more helpful? Which one could be debilitating? In reality, they're both important. And that's because the extrinsic motivation, like the goals that we set, we pick them because they're inspiring, and so if they're inspiring, then we're going to be more willing to do the work, as we're working our way toward them. So in other words, these extrinsic motivators and goals, they give us a direction for our efforts. When we start moving that direction, though, it's important to be intrinsically motivated. Like we want to do the work for its own sake and enjoy it as much as possible. An important way that we can find balance between these is knowing when we need to be motivated by which one. Extrinsic motivation, we're thinking about something stressful, like a goal I want to accomplish. I'm here, I'm going to need to go through some stress in order to be able to accomplish this important goal for myself. So when we're in our comfort zone, we can be thinking about those inspiring, stressful goals. When we're engaged, working toward it, we need to shift motivation toward intrinsic motivation. Being willing to be in the stress, the struggle, the difficulties for their own sake, the learning that we draw from that. And along the way, we might stop and reflect on, that goal again to make sure we might need to do course corrections. But we just need to know where we are. Are we sort of stopped and thinking about the goal, or are we engaged and doing the work for its own sake? It's a nice balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as you're talking, I'm remembering a certain subset of the population who it's almost like they live automatically. Like they don't have intrinsic or extrinsic motivations. It's just, I grow up, I go to college, I get a job, I get married, I have a kid, I have another kid, I maybe get a promotion, but it's just everything is very automated. We have trends that we're part of, just based on our culture or what have you. And it seems to me that that something you're talking about, and I think the reason there's coaching around this and everything is for us to be happy, we have to know what our goals are. So is there a step before intrinsic or extrinsic motivation where we try to establish that and we try to figure that out?
Yeah, I think the step before is pausing and developing some awareness about why is my life the way it is right now? And where do I want to take it? So it's going to take some time to reflect on where we've been, where we want to go. Like a simple example is like, we look for our calling, like what are we called to do? What do we really want to do in how we're going to invest our time and effort? So to take time to pause and reflect on that, and it can like a long process. Like it's not something that I'm going to stop for 1 hour and be able to get all the answers. Sometimes it can take years even, but we take time to reflect. We'll maybe get some ideas about what that goal is that we want to do, the calling. Maybe engage that for a while. We stop again, and say, well, that's not quite what it was, and then get some more ideas and engage again. This whole process is like stopping, getting quiet, getting still, and kind of tuning in. Like, and this is where, of course, meditation is a perfect thing to do, where you can quiet the mind, quiet the body, and be more receptive to, these subtle yearnings or urges of being called in certain directions. So I think that's an important part for before we can like say, well, that's the end goal that I want to achieve, because a lot of times we will set those end goals and they take us in the direction that's not where we ultimately want to go. The typical metaphor is they say, oh, you're climbing the ladder, but then when you get to the top, you find it's leaning up against the wrong wall.
Yeah. So I guess your answer to that would be increased stillness allows us to become mindful of some of the, in some cases, social default settings that we're operating on.
Everything that we have done, like in testing this material in climbing, has really revealed a lot of important things about how mental training concepts integrate. One of them is this comfort-based motivation. It's very natural. We are moved through the easiest way through stressors. That's just the way it is. And so we also have an easy way to live life is to follow what other people are doing or what other people are telling us to do. So this kind of speaks to what you were saying earlier, Jonathan. It's like we can just muddle along, not knowing where we're going, doing what we think we're supposed to do. And it really takes time to say, no, I need to do something tangible to interrupt this automatic response. Being able to figure out where you truly want to go, for goals, where you're calling, then our comfort-based motivation is directed there. It's kind of like let's say our current life situation is here, our goal is here, and there's, in a sense, there's sort of a structural tension created between the two, kind of a gap that wants to be closed. So we follow the easiest way as we go through life, but we're going into a meaningful direction if we have those goals.
This strikes me as such a climbing based metaphor. I think it's really great. You've got here and here, and I'm going to pick the easiest way through those difficulties. But I wanted to, ask you something kind of about the ethics of this, because I think also like in previous conversations, we've talked a little bit about the utility of mindfulness practice, or in this case, we could talk about the utility of, a methodology for surpassing ourselves or for going through difficulties in the surface of a goal. But it strikes me that we might run into ethical problems when we have this like awesome methodology, but somehow it's kind of like, a knife in a sense, because a knife can be used to cut things, a knife can be used to hurt people. But the fact that you have a really sharp knife, how do you know what to use it for? Like, how do you do that ethical check-in to say, I have this amazing methodology to do whatever I want, but if I put that in the service of something that's socially destructive, ultimately, I'm not doing it for the greater good.
We can get really skilled at using our attention and we can use it for destructive purposes, right? I think, first of all, it's important to have a mental training program that you commit to, because when we start digging into, our own mind, our own psychology, we start, first of all, being able to move in directions that are more meaningful to us, our calling. And we come up against limitations that will reveal themselves that we can work with. And one of those limitations that kind of speaks to your question is a truer reality is how the whole world is interconnected. When we're over here more like ego focused, or self focused, we're really living more in an illusion. It's like we can't do anything alone. Even with breathing, we need to cooperate with air, or walking on the ground, we have to cooperate with the planet below our feet. To have a conversation like we are right now, we have to have other people to talk with. We have to cooperate with the technology in order to make it happen. So as we do our mental training, we kind of move on a continuum away from this sort of illusion of separateness to a truer reality of our interconnectedness. And that in itself diminishes unethical behavior, because we see more of what our impact is going to be and how we're using our attention or actions that we take. And we actually start having two goals, two general kinds of goals. One is more a self-actualization goal that we can start with, like, what vehicle do I want to go? What's my calling to actualize more of my full potential? But then we also have this other general goal of transcendence, to serve others through the wisdom and the skills that we develop as we're going through this self-actualization process. And it's not like we do this and then all of a sudden we're ready to transcend and serve others. They kind of parallel each other. As we go through the process of, learning, we're able to focus more on service to others, which aligns with this more interconnected reality that we're a part of. And when we experience that, we feel more connected, and it brings actually more meaning to our lives. Like, we can think that, if I'm over here, just focusing on what I want, that's going to bring me meaning. But true meaning usually comes through service to others.
Ask like a sequencing question. Can we get to this non-ego driven, other-centric giving back without going through can we get to transcendence without first going through the self-actualization?
The quick answer is probably no. The longer answer is that we do it in fits and starts. It's like we don't just focus 20 years, to self-actualize our potential, and then, we're ready now to, serve others. We learn something, and then even while we're learning, we might be serving our family, or serving others, but then it kind of a cycle between them. But sometimes we're sort of forced in the direction of transcendence, like through a traumatic event. We can have a trauma. A simple example is Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. It's like you have a catastrophic event happen, where you lose a child, and that shifts your focus, your calling, to something that you can create, so you can provide and serve the world, to help other people, either not experience that trauma or diminish the number of people that would experience that kind of a trauma.
So if I hear you right, I think what you're suggesting is that, this kind of process by which we apprentice ourselves to something, like, let's say we set a stretch goal, and then we know that, like, you cannot reach the stretch goal. And so in order to get there, you have to go through a kind of a self-actualization process of which you can, apply this methodology. And that by applying this type of methodology to grow, you have no choice but to open yourself and connect and have a better relationship with reality, which then has its own ethical consequences. Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
I guess there, when we think about ethics, it's behavior that impacts other people. And so we're going to behave when we're focusing on just ourselves in certain ways. We're going to behave when we're interacting with other people, and both can have impact on others. Even though we might be doing things for ourselves, we're still impacting the world. We're still impacting other people, whether we realize it or not.
And I think like this is one of the things that I remember from reading your book that I really loved is this business of, you can't act effectively on a lie. You have to really pay very close attention to the messages that reality is sending you, because there's like an incredible amount of information in there. And I wonder if you could sort of maybe say a few words about the kind of relationship we want to cultivate with reality, because I found that was very strong in your book.
People say like there's only one reality, but really we each fabricate our own reality based on our experiences and how what we're perceiving is biased. One of the biggest shifts I think is important to make in how we understand reality, so we can see it more clearly and not be subjected to lies like you're saying. We can tend to see things in an either or situation. Either I'm right or I'm wrong, and then if we're in an argument like that, our ego will tend not to want to be wrong, so we'll defend ourselves being right instead of being willing to listen and solve the problem. I think an important shift out of either or is toward both and. Like, okay, both of us we're here together, we have a disagreement. Part of my understanding of the situation is true, and probably some lies in it, and similar for you. So let's each of us speak and share, and then while the other one is listening, and then through that both of us can solve this problem. So I think that's really one of the biggest things that we need to do as far as a mind shift, moving toward more both and understanding of reality, because it really does shift us in the direction of this interconnected reality of the world. We can be part of something larger. When we have two people that have a disagreement, we have two different views. When they come together, it can actually create more than just two things. They can create a new realization that is broader and more accurate than what either individual had themselves. When we're in relationship, we're in a more accurate reality of how the world is.
I wonder, Arno, if, one of the questions that we always ask on the podcast, because it's called the Mindful Wealth Podcast, we kind of have this discussion of what is true wealth. And we have the discussion, like maybe, for in some respects, it ends up being financial because wealth has financial connotations. But if I was to ask you the question, what does it mean to you to be truly wealthy? What might you say to that?
I think it's, we can apply the both and understanding of reality to that also. It's like in a general sense, the both and is like, I both have an internal life or world, and I also have an external life and world. So we do have external wealth. That's a reality, and we set goals to strive for that. But an internal wealth is, I think, from a mental training perspective, being able to be more mentally fit, right? So, having what I might call mental fitness health instead of like mental fitness illness. So we've developed our minds, we've developed our abilities with our developing awareness, with the use of our attention, where we can direct our attention more purposefully. Meaning we're less reactive, which means what? It means we can be more calm in the midst of chaotic situations and have more peace in our life. So that's wealth money can't buy, right? So, but that's the whole goal for mental training is like, yeah, that's the kind of wealth, that's the kind of mindset I want to have, throughout my day in how I'm interacting with these stressors. And it brings us back to, what is a warrior? It's like someone that has this ability, to not shirk away from the stressors that are going to come inevitably, but to engage them willingly, even eagerly, to be present for the interactions that we have, that some of them are going to be stressful and uncomfortable. We start seeing, yeah, I actually want to have some of those experiences in my life because they're kind of the raw material for growing the relationship. But having the mindset and the mental ability to do that takes time to develop.
I just want to say thank you, Arno. I think that's a great closing statement, and we're going to use that in some kind of show notes somewhere, I'm sure.
Okay.
So thanks very much for being on.